Have you ever felt that strange blend of being present and yet somehow absent at the very same time? That situation where everyone seems to rely on you to make things happen, yet no one truly expects you to be there to enjoy the moment yourself? It's like being the silent gear in a machine that shines for everyone else but never for itself. That was exactly what happened to Elaine, a woman who, for decades, had devoted herself entirely to her family, 3 daughters, a husband, a house, and in the process, she slowly faded away, almost forgetting who she was before she took on so many roles and responsibilities. Her story begins on a day that could have been like any other, if not for one detail, a phone call that would become the final straw. Elaine was at home in the late afternoon, tending to simple tasks, rinsing a mug, dusting a shelf, straightening a vase when her cell phone rang. On the other end, the cheerful voice of Laura, her eldest daughter, brought news. Mom, we're going to have a party to celebrate Isla's promotion. For an instant, Elaine's heart filled with joy. After all, there's nothing more gratifying than seeing your child achieve something they've worked hard for. She pictured the gathering, the toasts, the laughter, and the pride of being able to say, "That's my daughter." But the conversation quickly took on a different tone. Laura continued, "Oh, and if you could come a little earlier to help set things up, that would be great." And that was it. No mention of Elaine sitting at the table, of being part of the celebration as a guest, of raising a glass along with the others. There was no place reserved for her as a mother, only as support. In that instant, the initial joy gave way to a bitter sensation, as if she were forever stuck backstage, helping set the stage for others to shine yet never being called into the scene herself. And maybe you felt something like that before, being needed but not wanted. Being present to serve, but never to be celebrated. It's a quiet kind of pain, hard to explain, because it doesn't come from a single grand act of cruelty, but from small exclusions repeated over time, until your heart gets used to expecting less than it deserves. For Elaine, that phone call wasn't just about a dinner. It was about years of a routine that always cast her as the supporting role, never the main character. And that day, something inside her shifted. An old discomfort she had long kept hidden began to grow, demanding to be heard. For the first time in a long while, she asked herself, what if I chose myself? What if I said no? She didn't know it yet, but that question would mark the beginning of a journey that would cross oceans literally and forever change the way she saw herself. A journey of self-discovery, freedom, empowerment, conflict, reconciliation, and above all, renewal. A journey that would prove it's never too late to reclaim your own story, and that sometimes, to truly find yourself, you have to lose sight of who you've been. And before you assume this is just another feel-good tale of overcoming hardship, let me be clear, it isn't. This is the story of a real woman, with flaws, fears, and doubts, who chose to challenge her own routine and break out of the role she had been assigned. And as you'll see, that choice shook everyone around her, uncovering secrets, testing loyalties, and opening doors she never imagined she would step through. Elaine had always been the type of person who woke before the sun rose and went to bed only when the city had fallen quiet. Not because she had trouble sleeping, but because her days never seemed to have enough hours. Before she even sipped her own coffee, she was already washing the dishes someone had left in the sink, folding laundry forgotten on the line, or replying to messages about problems that weren't hers, but somehow always ended up on her to-do list. It had been this way for decades. Since the day she married, and especially after becoming the mother of 3 daughters: Laura, the eldest, determined and controlling; Julia, the middle child, sensitive yet practical; and Isla, the youngest, a dreamer bursting with energy. Over time, that routine became so automatic it felt natural. Organizing things, tending to the house, handling whatever was pending, putting out emotional fires, all of it without anyone needing to ask. Elaine knew by heart each daughter's schedule, preferences, fears, even quirks. She knew that Laura preferred her coffee strong and black, that Julia had the habit of reading before bed, and that Isla liked to chat while cooking. But when it came to her, no one could say what her favorite dish was, her hobby, or even her childhood dream. Slowly, she had become the invisible mother, the one who kept everything running smoothly but was rarely remembered when it came time to celebrate. Her marriage to Robert, the girl's father, had been long, but in recent years far from happy. When they finally divorced, Elaine believed she might reclaim a little bit of herself. But the truth was, even divorced, the dynamic hadn't changed much. Robert still showed up to weigh in on household decisions, interfered in conversations with the daughters, and made a point of maintaining a presence that felt less paternal and more territorial. He had that concerned tone that masked control. And without even realizing it, Elaine still cast herself in the role of mediator, trying to prevent conflicts and keep everything peaceful. The most painful part wasn't his interference, it was the way her daughters, even while loving their mother, had learned to treat her as a kind of resource. If they needed a ride, they called her. If there was a financial problem, she found a way to fix it. If someone wanted advice, she listened, but rarely did anyone pause to ask how she was feeling. Invitations were never just to enjoy her company. There were always tasks. Always functions. Her presence was always conditional on being useful. Elaine began to notice, in small moments, how this was eroding something inside her. In the rare instances she had a bit of free time, she would find herself looking at an old box of photographs tucked away in the closet. They were images of a younger Elaine, smiling on trips, holding a simple camera, exploring cities and beaches before she married. The woman in those photos seemed alive, curious, full of dreams. And the contrast with the reflection she now saw in the mirror was painful. The most unsettling realization was understanding that, in a way, she herself had contributed to ending up here. She had always believed that putting herself first was selfish. That being a good mother meant being available for everyone, all the time. When friends suggested she take some time just for herself to travel alone or invest in a hobby, she would smile politely and say it wasn't the right time or that she didn't really need it. Deep down, she feared seeming ungrateful or being judged for prioritizing something that didn't involve her family. But that belief was beginning to crack. It was as if an inner voice, timid but persistent, was whispering that she also had the right to exist outside the role of mother. That self-discovery wasn't selfishness, but survival. That freedom wasn't abandonment, but presence with oneself. She didn't yet know how to take the first step, but she could feel something inside her was about to change. And it's in this setting that our story begins to take shape, an apparently ordinary woman, but one filled with untold stories, on the verge of experiencing a moment that would shake every foundation in her life. The spark would come from where she least expected, from a phone call that, at first glance, seemed like just another everyday conversation with her daughter, but that would ignite the flame of a silent and later loud revolution in Elaine's life. It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those where time seems to drift by without hurry. Elaine was in the backyard tending to her plants, one of the few times in the day she could disconnect from everything else. As she sprayed water over the leaves, she felt her phone vibrating in the apron pocket. She glanced at the screen and saw Laura's name. She smiled. Laura didn't usually call in the middle of the week, so Elaine imagined it might be some happy news. "Hi, Mom." Laura's voice came through, lively and upbeat. "You won't believe it. Isla got promoted." Elaine felt a warmth in her chest, as if she could see her youngest daughter receiving the news. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. She must be over the moon," she replied, with the genuine joy of someone who always celebrated the victories of others. Excited, Laura went on, "We're throwing her a party on Saturday. I've already spoken to her co-workers, and we're inviting some friends over to our place." As Laura spoke, Elaine was already picturing herself joining in the toast, helping pick the music, taking pictures of everyone smiling. It was almost as if she were there, even before the event happened. But then came the sentence that made the world slow down a little. "Oh, and if you could come about 3 hours early to help set things up, we'll need someone in the kitchen, and I know you're great at getting everything ready in no time." Elaine's smile froze. There was no "we want you with us to celebrate" or "we can't wait to enjoy this together." There was only an assignment of a role. She wasn't being invited as a mother to sit at the table, she was being called in as labor. A helper. Support. The conversation went on for a few more minutes, with Laura discussing the guest list, the menu, and the decorations, but Elaine was no longer really listening. Her chest tightened, her stomach churned. When she hung up, she stood in the backyard, still holding the spray bottle, trying to process what she had just felt. It wasn't just sadness. It was a blend of invisibility and being used. A painful reminder that, for many, she existed to serve, not to be celebrated. She walked back inside, dropped the sprayer into the sink, and sat on the couch. Memories began flashing before her eyes. Isla's birthday the year before, when she had spent most of the time in the kitchen, the New Year's dinner, when she had worked for hours preparing everything and barely joined the table, the small family gatherings where no one asked if she wanted to sit or needed anything, everyone just assumed she was fine as long as she was serving. Elaine took a deep breath. Maybe she was overreacting, she thought. Maybe Laura just hadn't expressed herself well. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the first time. The difference was that this time, something inside her refused to swallow it. It was as if a door had opened, and behind it was an uncomfortable truth: if she didn't change something, she would spend the rest of her life as nothing more than the backdrop to everyone else's story. And in that moment, there in the quiet of the living room, an improbable idea began to form. It had no shape yet, no plan, but it already had power: the desire to do something for herself without asking permission, without waiting to be invited. A daring choice that, until then, she had never allowed herself to even consider. That night, Elaine tried to carry on with her routine as if nothing had happened. She prepared a simple dinner, ate alone at the table, and washed the dishes in silence. But no matter how much she tried to distract herself, the conversation with Laura kept replaying in her mind, like a song you can't get rid of. With every repetition, the words "help set things up" grew heavier. This wasn't just about Isla's party, it was about all the times her presence had been reduced to a function, not a bond. She sat on the couch, grabbed the remote, and started flipping through channels without really paying attention. Then, stopping absent-mindedly on a travel program, an image caught her gaze: a narrow cobblestone street bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, where a yellow tram moved slowly along the tracks. On the screen, images of Lisbon appeared. The soft voice of the narrator spoke of the city's charms, its cozy cafes, the aroma of custard tarts, its history-rich squares. Something inside Elaine stirred. She leaned forward, as if she could step into the screen. With each image, she felt a mix of nostalgia and curiosity. Nostalgia because she remembered a time when travel was part of her plans, and curiosity because it had been so long since she'd felt such a strong urge to explore something new. It wasn't just the destination, it was the idea of being far away, free, anonymous, able to choose what to do each day without consulting anyone. When the program ended, she sat in silence for a few minutes, letting that feeling settle inside her. Then she reached for her laptop and, without thinking much about it, typed "flights to Lisbon" into the search bar. It was an almost automatic gesture, like opening a window just to see what might be outside. She expected to find outrageous prices or impossible dates. But there it was, a flash sale for a flight departing in just a few days. Her heart began to race. For several minutes, she hovered over the purchase button, the cursor blinking like a challenge. A flood of thoughts rushed through her mind. What about the girls? What about the house? What if they think I've lost my mind? But alongside them came another question, one that, this time, felt far stronger. What if I don't go? What if I stay exactly where I am for how many more years? That question hurt more than all the others combined. She took a deep breath and, with a single click, confirmed the purchase. Seconds later, an email landed in her inbox with the booking number and flight details. Elaine stared at the screen in disbelief. She had done it. It was as if she had crossed an invisible line, a barrier she herself had built over the years, and now it had begun to crumble. She closed the laptop, walked into the kitchen, and picked up a notepad. On it, she wrote a short note, only a few words, but loaded with meaning. Girls, I needed to take a few days for myself. Everything is fine. Take care of yourselves. Love you. Mom. She folded the paper neatly and placed it on the table beside a flower she had picked in the backyard earlier that morning. In the days that followed, packing her suitcase felt unlike anything she'd done in years. There was no endless checklist of items for others, no worry about pleasing everyone else. Just comfortable clothes, a pair of walking shoes, a notebook for her thoughts, and the old camera she'd found along with those faded photographs. Each item she placed inside felt like a piece of herself she was reclaiming. And with every zipper she closed, something within her opened. When the plane took off, Elaine gazed out the window and watched the city lights fade into the distance. Down below were the roles she had played for years. Up here was the start of a journey she didn't yet know the destination of, but that had already changed everything simply because it had begun. Lisbon greeted her with a clear sky and a gentle breeze carrying the salty scent from the Tagus River. The moment she stepped out of the airport, Elaine felt something different, as if the air itself were lighter. She took a taxi, and as they drove through the first streets, she noticed how the city seemed like a living painting: old buildings covered in colorful tiles, balconies draped with laundry drying in the sun, tiny cafes with sidewalk tables where people lingered over conversations without hurry. On her first day, she decided not to make any plans. She woke early not because she had to, but because she wanted to savor every moment. She enjoyed a simple breakfast at the hotel: fresh bread, butter, and strong coffee before heading out to wander. At every corner, she found something that made her stop: a second-hand bookshop, an ancient fountain, an elderly woman smiling as she sold flowers. She ducked into a small pastry shop and ordered a warm pastel de nata. The sweet custard and flaky crust melted in her mouth, and with that taste came the realization of just how long it had been since she'd eaten something purely for her own pleasure, without rushing, without sharing, without obligation. On the second day, she ventured into the Alfama district, famous for its narrow streets and steep hills. She climbed slowly, pausing to take in the details: the distant sound of fado music drifting from an open window, the clinking of cups in the hands of waiters, the cats crossing the street as if they owned the place. She found a lookout point and sat there, watching the river sparkle in the sunlight. That's when she remembered her long-forgotten dream of photography. Later that day, she wandered into a small, unassuming camera shop. The sign outside was modest, but inside, she was greeted by Manuel, the elderly owner, whose hands bore the marks of time and whose smile was warm. He showed her a used professional camera, its surface worn in places: proof, he said, that it's already seen a great deal of beauty in the world. Elaine didn't hesitate. She bought it, and from that moment on, she carried it everywhere. She photographed whatever caught her attention: not just monuments or landscapes, but details: a child chasing pigeons, the golden reflection in a window at sunset, the intertwined hands of an elderly couple sipping coffee together. A few days later, she traveled to Porto. There, she let herself get lost in the streets, following nothing but her own intuition. She stopped for lunch at a small restaurant, ordering bacalhau au bras and a glass of port wine. As she raised the glass in a solitary toast, she realized she was happy, and that this happiness did not depend on anyone's approval. It was a quiet joy, but deep: a kind of empowerment she had never experienced before. With each passing day, the sense of freedom became more tangible. Elaine chose her own paths, her own schedules, her own company. If she wanted to talk, she struck up conversations with strangers; if she wanted silence, she simply walked. There were no judgments, no demands. And with every photograph she took, she felt she was not only capturing Portugal, but also reclaiming pieces of herself she had lost over the years. At the end of each afternoon, she returned to the hotel with a camera full of images and a heart that felt lighter. She would write in her notebook about the day's sensations: what she saw, what she felt, what she learned. It was as if she were building a map of self-discovery, where each street and each snapshot represented a step back toward her own essence. She didn't know it yet, but that feeling of fullness would be tested much sooner than she imagined. Because, on the other side of the ocean, something was already in motion, and soon, the past would come knocking at her door, forcing her to decide not only where she wanted to be, but who she wanted to be. It was morning in Porto when Elaine awoke to the insistent buzz of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. The grey light filtering through the window hinted at a rainy day ahead. Still half asleep, she reached over and saw a string of missed calls from Julia, her middle daughter. Her heart began to pound. Julia was not one to call so many times, especially not this early. Elaine answered immediately, and her daughter's voice came fast: "Anxious Mom, Dad's saying he's going to take care of the house until you get back. He told me you're not doing well and that you need help managing things." Elaine stayed silent for a few seconds, trying to process it. Robert had always had a particular talent for twisting reality so that he appeared caring and altruistic, when in truth, his actions were driven by self-interest. Julia, still nervous, explained that he had shown up unannounced and started talking about how, with the property value rising, it was important to secure the family's future. But Elaine knew that language well. This wasn't about family, it was about control and personal gain. As her daughter spoke, old memories flashed through her mind, past arguments, empty promises, unilateral decisions. Robert had that almost theatrical ability to wear the mask of the responsible man while quietly manipulating situations to his advantage. But now, it wasn't just with her he was trying to involve their daughters, crafting a narrative where Elaine was unstable and incapable of managing her own home. Soon after, Laura sent messages confirming that Robert had been hanging around the house, talking to neighbors, even suggesting that maybe it would be better if he took over decision-making. Isla, for her part, seemed confused. "Mom, he said he only wants to help, that you're tired and it's better for you to rest." The words sounded gentle, but Elaine recognized the tactic: plant doubt, weaken trust, undermine authority. She sat up in bed, phone still in hand, and felt the weight of a choice. Returning immediately would mean giving up the new life she had only just begun to build. But staying could allow Robert to push even further. For the first time, she realized that the problem wasn't just about protecting a property, it was about protecting her own narrative, making sure he didn't rewrite her story with his usual twisted ink. Taking a deep breath, she decided she wouldn't react impulsively. She sent a short but firm message to Julia: "Tell your father he has no rights whatsoever over the house. And that I know exactly what he's trying to do. Everything is under control." It was more than a reply, it was a reaffirmation that this time, she would act strategically. Later that same day, she called James, the lawyer who had helped with her divorce, and told him everything. James was direct: "He has no legal power over the house, but if he's messing with the girls' heads, he might be preparing something bigger. Well, proceed carefully." That confirmed what Elaine had already suspected. This wasn't just one of Robert's whims, it was a calculated attempt to regain control. That afternoon, she went out walking in the light drizzle of Porto, her camera hanging from her neck, and realized she was standing at an emotional crossroads. Portugal had given her a taste of freedom and empowerment she didn't want to lose, but now, the stakes were much higher. The real test wouldn't be taking pictures or wandering down foreign streets, it would be defending what was hers without losing the woman she had rediscovered. The flight home felt heavier than the flight out. Gone was the freshness of adventure, in its place was a knot in her stomach that tightened with every passing hour. Throughout the trip, Elaine rehearsed in her mind what she would say to Robert, calculating every response, imagining every possible scenario. When the plane landed, the familiar air of Brazil brought not relief, but confirmation the battle was about to begin. She got into a taxi, staring out the window like someone looking at a city they know well but see differently upon returning with new eyes. She felt like a person coming back from training camp, now prepared to use the skills she had learned. But as the car turned onto her street, the impact was immediate. The front door was ajar, and boxes were stacked in the hallway. A silent rage rose in her throat. She walked in and found Robert sitting comfortably on the couch, an attorney right beside him, as if he were the rightful host of the place. He rose slowly to his feet, wearing that rehearsed smile he always used before trying to twist a situation in his favor. "Elaine, we need to talk. It's better if we settle this amicably, thinking about what's best for the family," he said, his voice calm, almost paternal in tone. Elaine stood her ground. She set her bag on the table and replied without raising her voice, her tone steady and unwavering. "Robert, you have absolutely no legal right over this house. If you want to discuss anything, it will be with my attorney present." His lawyer tried to interject, but she lifted her hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "And just so we're clear, James is already aware of everything." The mere mention of that name seemed to rattle Robert for a brief moment. That's when the sound of footsteps on the stairs drew everyone's attention. The daughters, drawn by the tension in the air, began to descend. Laura glanced back and forth between them, clearly unsure which side to stand on. Julia's expression was closed off, guarded. And Isla, her face clouded with confusion, looked like she was still trying to understand what was going on. Robert, realizing he had an audience, immediately switched his tone. He feigned concern, his words dripping with counterfeit sweetness. "Girls, I just want to make sure your mother is okay. She hasn't been thinking clearly." But this time, Elaine didn't allow his narrative to take root. She looked firmly at her 3 daughters and spoke with a clarity that cut through the room like glass. "I am perfectly lucid more than ever. And this house is mine. Robert, leave. Now." The silence that followed was so thick it felt like the air itself had grown heavier. When he hesitated, she stepped forward and opened the front door. It was a simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of complete authority. His attorney leaned in and whispered something in his ear, and without another word, the 2 of them left. Closing the door behind them, Elaine felt a rush of mixed relief and adrenaline. This wasn't over, she knew that well. Robert wouldn't give up easily. But this moment was symbolic. The woman who once would have yielded just to avoid a fight was now standing her ground, calm and unshaken. She sat in the kitchen, brewed herself some tea, and gazed at her daughters. They were silent, but something in the air had shifted. Maybe they weren't ready yet to take sides, but they no longer seemed entirely convinced by the stories their father had been telling. And for Elaine, that was already a start. The days after that confrontation were strangely quiet. Robert's physical presence was gone, but the tension still hovered in the house like a lingering shadow. Elaine could sense something was off in the way her daughters behaved. Laura avoided making eye contact. Julia had grown more introspective. And Isla seemed to be carrying a weight she didn't know how to put into words. It was on a grey afternoon, as Elaine stood in the kitchen making coffee, that Julia walked in and broke the silence. "Mom, there's something you need to know." Her voice was low, as if the walls themselves could overhear. Elaine dropped the spoon into the sink and turned around, a chill running down her spine. Julia took a deep breath before continuing. Dad had been meeting with Isla for weeks. Before the party. And that celebration, it wasn't just for her promotion. Isla, who had been coming down the stairs, froze on the last step, her eyes wide. "You told her?" she asked, not with anger, but with a strange mix of shame and relief. Julia nodded. Elaine looked at her youngest daughter, who hesitated before speaking. "He said he wanted to help me with my career, that he had contacts and that you'd been too busy lately to get involved." I believed him. The words hung in the air, heavy and almost tangible. Elaine felt her chest tighten, not only because of what she'd just learned, but because she could now see how Robert's manipulation had been so carefully crafted. He wasn't just after control of the house, been sowing seeds of doubt in her daughters' minds, slowly eroding the bond between them. Laura, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Now it makes sense. Those messages he sent me telling me Mom was stressed, that she needed rest, that maybe she wasn't thinking straight. I thought it was strange, but he spoke like he was worried." Julia added, her tone sharper now. "It wasn't real concern. He was building a story." In that instant, the entire atmosphere shifted. It was no longer Elaine against Robert. It was Elaine and her daughters standing together against a lie. Isla, her eyes brimming with tears, stepped closer to her mother. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know I was being used." Elaine pulled her into a firm, steady embrace, feeling a bittersweet blend of sadness and relief. "What matters now is that you do know. And we're going to handle this together." The rest of that afternoon turned into an exercise in collective memory. The 3 sisters began to recall conversations, text messages, and situations where Robert had slipped in subtle insinuations. Small incidents that, when seen alone, had seemed harmless but when pieced together, formed a clear and disturbing pattern of manipulation. Each memory was like a puzzle piece snapping into place, revealing an image none of them wanted to see, but all of them needed to confront. For Elaine, this sudden unity carried deep meaning. It wasn't just about regaining her daughter's trust, it was about showing them that even when someone tries to twist the truth, it's possible to turn the situation around if you have the courage to face the facts hidden. And at that moment, she knew the next step would not be purely emotional. It would have to be strategic. The morning after that revelation, Elaine woke up with a sensation she hadn't felt in years: clarity. The sting of what she'd learned still hurt, but something stronger had begun to emerge: determination. This wasn't just about defending herself anymore. It was about taking deliberate action to end Robert's cycle of manipulation once and for all. She sat at the kitchen table with her daughters. The air was serious, but not oppressive. Laura set down a pot of coffee, Julia opened her laptop, and Isla, still a little subdued, looked at her mother as if waiting for instructions. Elaine spoke with measured firmness. "We're going to need evidence. Messages, voice notes, anything that shows exactly what he's been doing." It was the first step, turning hurt into strategy. Each daughter had something to contribute. Laura remembered text messages on her phone, and when she read through them again, she noticed how each line had been carefully worded to sow doubt about her mother. Julia pulled up emails and screenshots that backed up the false narrative Robert had been spreading. And Isla, now determined to make amends for having trusted him, admitted she still had voice notes and messages from their so-called career advice conversations which, in hindsight, sounded like nothing but pure manipulation. Within hours, the pile of evidence began to grow. But Elaine knew they needed more. She picked up the phone and called Marcos, an old family friend who worked as a real estate broker. His response was blunt. "Robert has his eye on several properties in that area. Your house is prime. If he gets it, he'll flip it fast and make a huge profit." The confirmation only solidified what Elaine already suspected: this was never about family concern, it was about money. Julia, ever pragmatic, suggested they speak with neighbors who might have noticed unusual activity when Elaine wasn't home. It didn't take long. 2 neighbors confirmed they had seen Robert entering the house with people they didn't recognize. One even mentioned overhearing conversations about changes to the property. Everything was noted down and recorded. By the end of the day, Elaine sent all the collected material to James, the attorney who already knew Robert's tactics well. Hours later, he called her. "With this, we can put real legal pressure on him. And if he pushes back, we have enough for a case on moral harassment and attempted unlawful appropriation." The final meeting was scheduled for the following week. Elaine arrived with her daughters beside her, James at her side carrying a thick folder. Robert entered with his usual confidence, but it began to falter when James started laying the evidence on the table: printed messages, audio recordings, neighbor testimonies, and Marcus' confirmation of Robert's real estate interest. Each document was like pulling a brick from the fortress Robert believed had built. When James was done, he was direct. "If you continue interfering in my client's life and in her daughters' lives, we will file a lawsuit that will not only be costly but will make all of this public record." The silence in the room was absolute. Robert looked at Elaine, perhaps expecting to find the submissive woman she used to be, but what he saw was someone steady, composed, and utterly unshakable. With no other choice, he agreed to back off. He left without his usual theatrics and, for the first time, without the last word. Elaine knew that even in victory, she would still have to deal with the marks he'd left behind. But at that moment, she felt she had regained more than just her home: she had regained herself, and the trust of her daughters. The weeks that followed Robert's final departure felt like the first light of dawn after a long, merciless night of storms. There were still clouds on the horizon, uncomfortable memories, wounds still tender, but slowly, light began to seep back into the scene. Elaine woke each day with a sensation entirely different from before. It was no longer the constant weight of having to be ready to solve everyone's problems, it was the lightness of knowing she was in control of her own time. The first thing she did was reorganize the house, not just to tidy things up, but to make the space reflect who she was now. She removed furniture that carried the heaviness of her past, painted walls in soft, bright colors, and hung up some of the photographs she had brought back from Portugal. The living room gained a special corner, an improvised studio, camera always ready on its tripod, and a small whiteboard where she jotted down ideas for new photos and possible exhibitions. Her relationship with her daughters also began to take a new shape. Laura started visiting more often, but now it was to share laughter and stories, not simply to ask for help. Julia found in her mother a partner for her professional projects, seeking advice not from dependence but from genuine collaboration. And Isla, perhaps the one most deeply changed by recent events, began to see Elaine not just as her mother, but as a woman, someone with the courage to reinvent herself. It was actually Isla's idea to hold an exhibition of Elaine's Portugal photographs at the city's cultural center. Photography, which had once been a personal rescue, became a daily ritual. Every morning, Elaine walked through neighborhoods she had never explored before, noticing details she used to overlook: the texture of an old door, sunlight cutting through leaves, the unguarded expressions of strangers passing by. Each click of the camera felt like a silent declaration of freedom and autonomy. She also decided to return to studying. She enrolled in an online visual arts course, something she had postponed for years. Immersing herself in learning made her realize that independence wasn't only financial or physical, it was also mental and creative. And as she went deeper into her studies, new ideas began to take shape: perhaps a photography book paired with short essays, perhaps a channel to share stories and images, perhaps thematic trips to capture different cultures. And speaking of trips, the passport that had once sat forgotten in a drawer now held a place of prominence on her desk. Elaine began researching the Greek islands, a destination she had always dreamed of visiting. This time, there was no urgency to escape from anything, only the pleasure of planning the next chapter of her life. Her daughters noticed that her transformation wasn't something isolated. In some way, it was inspiring changes in them as well. Laura began setting firmer boundaries in her marriage. Julia took bigger risks in her career. And Isla, excited about a new job opportunity on the horizon, knew she would have her mother's full support to pursue it, just as Elaine had done for herself. Between coffee dates, family gatherings, and days of quiet contemplation, Elaine realized that the greatest gain wasn't simply regaining her home or breaking free from Robert's manipulation. The real victory was reconnecting with her own essence and strengthening the bond with her daughters. She was no longer living just to be needed, she was living to be whole. Months passed since that last confrontation with Robert. Life, once clouded by tension, now flowed at a calmer rhythm. The house was filled with new colors, new sounds, and above all, new stories. The walls, once weighed down by heavy silence, now echoed with laughter, conversation, and the steady click of Elaine's camera. She had turned every corner of her home into a space that breathed freedom. The improvised studio in the living room became her creative refuge. Surrounded by scattered photographs, notebooks, and a small desk lamp, Elaine prepared for what would be a personal milestone: her very first photography exhibition. Each image she selected felt like opening a drawer of her own soul. An alley in Lisbon represented courage. A staircase in Porto symbolized resilience. A café along the Tagus whispered of reconnection. The event, held at the city's cultural center, might not attract a massive crowd, but for her, it would be a kind of consecration. It was in this atmosphere of preparation that Isla came home one day, holding an envelope in her hands. "Mom, I think you should sit down." Elaine laughed softly, curious, but did as she was told. When Isla opened the envelope and read aloud, the words hit Elaine like an echo from destiny: an official job offer in Lisbon. For a few seconds, Elaine sat completely still. The city that had been the stage for her rebirth was now calling her youngest daughter. "Are you going to take it?" she asked, trying to contain the rush of emotion in her voice. Isla bit her lip. "I want to, but I'm scared. It's far. It's also new." Elaine took her daughter's hands and looked directly into her eyes. "Fear means it's important. Don't ignore it. What I lived through there changed my life, and you deserve to live something like that too. Choosing yourself is always the right choice." There was certainty in her voice, not because the choice would be easy, but because she spoke from a place of real experience. The days that followed were filled with planning and long conversations. Elaine shared every detail of her own journey, including the moments of loneliness and uncertainty, so that Isla would understand that freedom and discomfort often walk hand in hand, but that the reward of truly knowing and expanding yourself is worth every step. Isla listened the way someone listens to an invisible inheritance being passed down a map for life. The day of departure came quickly. At the airport, the embrace between mother and daughter wasn't one of farewell, but one of passing the torch. Elaine watched as Isla walked toward the boarding gate with steady, confident steps, and she felt something deep inside, not just pride, but the certainty that she had broken a cycle. She had shown her daughters that it was possible to set yourself free, and in doing so, had given them permission to do the same. Back home, Elaine threw herself into the final preparations for the exhibition. When the night of the event arrived, the cultural center's modest hall was filled with curious faces. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers wandered among the photographs, pausing to listen to the stories behind each one. Elaine spoke calmly, but with a spark in her eyes. She knew that, to an outsider, these were simply beautiful images, but to her, each one was living proof that life can be rebuilt, piece by piece. When the event ended and the hall emptied, Elaine remained standing before one of her most cherished images, a street in Lisbon bathed in the golden light of sunset. She smiled, not because everything had been easy, but because it had been worth it. For the first time, she felt she was exactly where she was meant to be, not just in a physical place, but within her own story. Elaine's story isn't just about a woman who decided to travel and found new meaning in life. It's about something much deeper, about courage, about the weight of choices, and about the ability to rewrite your own narrative even when the whole world seems to be pushing you into a role you never chose. Think about it for a moment. How many times have you found yourself living on autopilot, checking off tasks, meeting expectations, and realizing deep down that your life was being written by someone else's hand? How many times has the fear of disappointing someone, or of facing judgment, outweighed the desire to follow what your heart was quietly asking for? This is the most silent and cruel trap there is, because it doesn't present itself as an urgent problem. It seeps in slowly through the everyday, until one day you realize you've been absent from your own story. Elaine lived that reality for decades. And maybe that's exactly why her decision seems so radical to those hearing her story for the first time. It wasn't a trip to run away. It was a rescue. It was a no more that began as a whisper but grew stronger each day until it became a shout of affirmation. And, like every process of transformation, it wasn't a straight line. There were doubts, stumbles, fears. But there was also one thing that changed everything: the awareness that waiting for the right moment can mean never acting at all. Hey race, something I want you to take with you: transformation rarely begins when we feel ready. It begins when we're too tired to keep living the way we are. It's uncomfortable, it's risky, but it's right in the middle of that chaos that we often find clarity. Elaine had no idea what her life would look like when she returned from Portugal. She didn't have a detailed plan, nor any guarantee that things would work out. But she took the first step anyway. Now, I want you to think about your own life. Where are you hiding behind the excuse of responsibility? Where are you postponing action because you believe now is not the time? It could be in your career, in your relationship, in the place you live, or even in how you take care of yourself. The truth is, there will always be something to hold you back: bills, opinions, commitments. But if you wait for all the traffic lights to turn green before crossing the street, you'll be standing there forever. And hey race, another lesson from Elaine's journey: the impact of our choices extends far beyond ourselves. When she decided to break free, she didn't just change her own life, she created space for her daughters to break free from patterns that could have trapped them too. That's powerful. Your courage to change may be the very permission someone close to you needs to do the same. Understand also that even after transformation, challenges don't disappear. Robert didn't vanish from Elaine's life without leaving scars. But the difference was that now, she had the emotional tools and self-confidence to handle any attempt at manipulation. That's another essential truth: empowerment doesn't mean eliminating problems, it means changing the way you respond to them. And if you think the story ends with the photography exhibition, you're mistaken. Because, in reality, Elaine's story continues, and that's how it is for all of us. There is no ultimate period in real life. Some chapters close, others begin. Today, Elaine is ready for new travels, for new discoveries, and she carries the certainty that she will never again play the role of a background character in her own life. Now, I want to make you an invitation. Before this video ends, look at your life as if it were a photo album. Imagine that each chapter is a picture. If you had to show that album to someone who doesn't know you, would it tell a story of fulfillment or of waiting? Would it show someone who lived fully, or someone who merely watched life go by? That question might be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Because, at the end of the day, we're all going to leave a record, whether in photos, in memories, or in the marks we leave on the people around us. The question is, what record do you want to leave? Do you want people to say you were always there for everyone else, but never for yourself? Or do you want them to say you lived authentically, made difficult choices, and inspired others to do the same? If you feel ready to take that first step, remember, it doesn't have to be a trip to another country or a drastic life change. It can start small. It can be signing up for that course you've been putting off for years. It can be reserving one day a week for something that makes you feel alive. It can be saying no to something that drains you and adds nothing to your life. What matters is that it's a step toward the life you want to live, not the life others expect you to live. And remember this: no one is going to show up with a ready-made script for you to follow. You're the one who writes it. You're the one who chooses the setting, the lines, the characters who stay and the ones who go. Of course, there will be criticism, there always is. But as Elaine learned, it's far better to be criticized for living your truth than to be applauded for playing a role that isn't yours. So, before you close this video, make yourself a promise that you will no longer wait to be the protagonist of your own story. That you will not allow your life to be defined only by what others need from you. That you will choose yourself even when it means going against expectations. And if this story stirred something in you, don't let that feeling fade with time. Use it as fuel. And if you want to keep receiving real, deep, and inspiring stories like Elena's stories that prove it's possible to start over at any stage, subscribe to this channel now, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Because, in the end, perhaps the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the freedom to live the life we truly want, and the greatest gift we can give to others is showing them that it's possible.